Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is the City of Heroes on the Rebirth server where we are once again doing a Let's Rant. We are with Psyop, who is our mutation stalker and is our mascot for these Let's Rants. And today, the topic of the rant, as we head to King's Row to talk to the security chief, the topic of the rant is going to be player agency. Now, I have discussed player agency before, but I just started reading a book which was recommended to his audience by Luke Hart, who runs the DM lair. Um, the book is called Arbiter of Worlds, and it's written by a man named Alexander Macris. And Macris has a good, sort of this light, breezy writing style, but what I like is his very thoughtful approach to how game mastering is really supposed to work and what you're actually doing as a game master and how you are supposed to run a game and what makes the game fun and not fun. And this is probably going to be a subject we will discuss at length because one of the frequent discussions and debates that comes up in online forums such as D&D Beyond or on Reddit or even in some of the Discord discussions I've had is the idea of fun and what constitutes fun in a role playing game, what makes something fun. Um, and and I think that a lot of people have misconceptions about this. Now, I'm not going to try to say, because it would be absurd, that people don't know when they're having fun. I think they do, right? You know it when you when you see it, right? You know it when you feel it, when you're having a good time, when you're smiling, when you're laughing, when you are glad to be part of the session, when you want to do it again next week, when you can't wait, and all of that sort of thing. That is what happens when you're having fun. So people know that they're having fun, but I think a lot of times they don't really stop to think about or even understand what actually is causing games to be fun. What is making this game fun for me? What is making it not fun? What parts of it aren't fun? Right? You'll see this if we ever get to, into the 40s. We start doing these outdoor missions where you have to like look for 5 hostages on a giant mega map the size practically the size of this zone. I hate those. They are not fun. Um, and there are reasons for that. So I think a lot of times people don't necessarily think about what it is that makes the game fun. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what makes a game fun and what it is that a GM can do to make the game fun and not fun. Uh, One of the things that Macros says at the beginning is that it is a common misconception of many people that it is the GM's job to make you have fun or to help you have fun. And Macros argues that that's not the case, that because there are so many variables involved in whether somebody enjoys something or not, the GM really can't make it so that you have fun. What the GM can do is create an environment in which having fun is possible, depending on what other things are going on, right? He makes it possible, or she makes it possible for you to have fun, but a lot of it depends um, on your own attitude and how you approach the game and on what activities you enjoy. And um, so he then asks, well, what is it about role playing games that makes them fun? Why do we play them? Why do we enjoy them? What about them do people like? What about them makes them fun? And what he argues is agency. Player agency is what makes a role playing game fun. It is fun to have agency, in particular because in the real world, we often don't have a lot of agency. You have to do what your boss says. I have very little agency at work. My students, I'm a college professor, would probably be shocked to find out that I feel that way. But I don't decide what classes I teach, and in the past, I had department chairs who were at least willing to listen to my requests for what I thought would be good to teach, but the current chair just does whatever she wants and completely ignores me. I also don't get to decide when I teach my classes. Students will ask me, why are you teaching this class at such and such of a time? Because that's when the chair assigned it to me. I am, in fact, teaching on a terrible schedule next semester, where I'm teaching like one class a day every day. I would much rather pile up all my classes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, all three of them or something, and then have Tuesdays and Thursdays to do research or something else. Nope, that's not what happened. So I don't have any agency. I don't decide. I don't even decide the content of the class. I have to kind of go with what's in the textbook. Um, I obviously don't just do that blindly, but I still have to some degree, I still have to do some of what is in the textbook, and I can't just completely disregard it, or else the students will be confused because what I'm teaching is not what's in the textbook, right? And so this is not just me. Many of us, oh boy, I wonder if we're going to find level 5s here. This isn't just me. Oh wait, I remember where to go. Many, many people, most people in their lives, do not feel like they have agency. And so he argues that one of the things we get from role playing games is agency. And as he started going down this path, I was like, oh boy, I'm going to hate this about this book, because the people on the internet who are always arguing about agency, I think, don't really understand it. And I wasn't sure if he was going to either. But it turns out that he actually does. And what Macris argues, where am I here? Here we go. What Macris argues is that agency is the ability to make choices that matter, make meaningful choices, choices that matter, and that being able to do that, which we generally can't do in our real lives, is fun for us. We make choices that matter. We affect the world, right? The princess is kidnapped by the orcs, and we decide to go to the orc lair, and we defeat the orc chieftain, and we save the princess, and she's okay now. Looking for lost, but I don't see any. And now that we've saved her, the kingdom is in better shape, and we get rewarded. Here we go. We get rewarded by the king, and now we get property in his lands, and we become landed gentry, and we have a stronghold, right? All of this these are consequences. These are things that happened as a result of choices that we made as characters. On a smaller scale, agency comes from making choices in battle. Whether to draw your sword and attack in melee or shoot at range is a choice, and it has consequences, because going into melee risks, getting attacks of opportunity from enemies and things like this that you don't get as a risk from ranged, but ranged attacks maybe don't do as much damage. And so Macris argues that your ability to make choices that matter is what determines whether you're going to have fun, and that in a typical role-playing game, the players have fun by making choices that matter. That's what agency consists of, he argues. Okay? And this is a very important definition, because then the question becomes, and he addresses this, what do we mean by saying that the choices matter? Well, what it means is that there can be more than one outcome depending on our choices, and that we could have a bad result. Oh boy, Psyblade, this is what we want. This is our signature attack. Wow, I thought these came at level 8. This is awesome. Not going to need that as much. We're not going to need that as much. Now we get to assassinate people with a real assassin strike. So for it to matter, there have to be multiple outcomes. If you think about City of Heroes, right? In a story arc in City of Heroes, I do not get to make choices that matter. My choices don't matter. Once you get onto a story arc, you cannot get off of it. and that story arc will proceed as written by the authors of the story arc, no matter what I do. You cannot fail a story arc. You can fail a mission, but all the game will do is give you the mission back again until you succeed at it. You never fail the mission and then go off on a different branch of the story arc that goes down the unsuccessful side, or fail the mission and fail the story arc. There's a mission where you have to like stop somebody from running out of the mission, right? And I've failed those before. It doesn't take you off the story arc. It gives you the next mission anyway. You just get chewed out by your contact for not capturing the guy. And it's like, oh, well, the police captured him later. No thanks to you. And now you go on with the next step in the mission. Well, that's not agency. Right? And it's not agency because my choices didn't matter. Right? If I did something that caused me not to be able to be at the elevator to stop the bad guy, I think we're done with this guy. We're going to hit Shauna Stockwell now. If I'm not able to stop the bad guy, the same thing happens as if I did stop the bad guy. Oh, you know what? I screwed up. No wonder we have Assassin's Strike at level 6. I didn't get my movement power. Can't get that till level 8. This character is going to get flight, by the way. Because she sort of levitates like telekinesis, right? All right, so Shauna. Where is she? Where is she? She should be in my contacts list. Maybe she's not active yet. So you have to be able to fail. Failure has to be real, and there have to be real consequences for failure. This means that like character death needs to be possible, character captivity needs to be possible. You have to be able to, let's go to the hollows. You have to be able to fail in real ways and have that failure kind of hurt, right? Hurt you, hurt others. And so what he argues is that agency is the ability to make choices where the outcome is not certain and your choices could be bad ones that lead to negative consequences, right? That there has to be that in the world. If all of your choices are just good, like in here where you just complete the story arc once you start it, you might fail missions and faceplant a bunch of times, but you know, I mean, if you're really determined to, you can complete just about any mission with enough inspirations and enough faceplants and enough trips to the hospital. You just keep doing it and doing it and doing it until you wear down the mission. It might take you an hour and a half, but if you're really determined to, you can finish a mission anytime you want, right? And so there's no agency to running a City of Heroes mission because you kind of can't fail it. And again, even if you fail it, like if it's a timed mission, you just get the next step in the story arc anyway. Or if you fail a timed mission, some of them, I don't remember exactly how they do it now, but it used to be, if you failed a timed mission, you just got it again. The contact just gave it back to you, and you had to do it again. And it used to drive me nuts because when I first started to play the game, and the game was set up to be a little bit harder than it is now, and you didn't get some of the early stuff that you get now. Oh, I forgot to get the Nemesis staff on this character. Oh well, she doesn't need it right now. All the little cheats that you get now. It was harder when the game first started, and it was possible to get into a mission that you just couldn't do. That was a time mission that you just couldn't do. And you would fail it, and you'd have to do it again. And then fail it and do it again. And they would just make you keep doing it until you succeeded. And what ultimately would happen is you would finally get so much XP from defeating everything in the mission that you would just level up. And once you're a higher level, you just mow it down, and then you succeed and go on to the next mission. So there's no agency to doing that mission because there's no consequence to failing it. So there's really no consequence to success. It's pre-scripted. It's a railroad, right? A true railroad. And so that's not giving you agency. And what he argues is if you're looking for agency for fun, it's not fun. Now, I still do have fun on City of Heroes missions, But I have fun because I like the gameplay, right? The assassinating. That is awesome, by the way. What an awesome assassin strike. The graphics, I like the sound effects, I like the button clicking, and I like being able to talk to you guys as we play the game. And so I find it satisfying and enjoyable, but it's not giving me any agency. That is absolutely for sure. Okay. So now what I want to talk about is these misconceptions about agency, because one of the things that players seem to confuse is that agency, they think, is letting me do whatever I want. Letting you do whatever you want is not agency. Letting you do whatever you want without consequences, Macros would argue, cannot be agency because I'm not giving you meaningful choices. The choices are unmeaningful, right? Like they are in City of Heroes, because you cannot fail. But a lot of players think that agency is about letting them make whatever choice they want no matter what without consequence. So right now I'm working on as a possibility for doing some solo gaming, but also I'm doing it pretty thoroughly because I'm hoping to someday run it for real. I'm working on the world of Harn, and feel free to look that up if you want. You can Google it. It's the setting for the game Harn Master, but I'm planning to use it with Savage Worlds. And so what I'm doing is I'm reading through the literature very slowly because it's very expensive literature. They charge you a lot of money for short articles, which I don't like, but they're really well done articles. I mean, you really get your money's worth out of them, so I can't complain too much. And, I have enough money to buy, a $10 PDF document. It's not that big of a deal. But it was done by really well educated experts on medieval history, and it's for lack of a better term, even though it's on an alternate world with fictional gods and stuff, it's a quote unquote medieval authentic type of a game because they actually have all the rules of feudalism in effect. So like class. Structure, social class, serfs, freedmen, and lords, right? Nobility. And so I was reading through a section on law. It's a document called Harnick Law. It's like a $10, 12-page document. And they talk about the rules and how there are pretty strict rules. And it's against the law for a person to like go out of their station. So a serf cannot like try to be a noble or act like a noble. And so they talk about weapons and how the serfs who are not free, they're not slaves, but they're not truly free. Um, Serfs um, can only use what they call tools. They can't use weapons. Now, some of the tools are weapons, right? Like a scythe you could use as a weapon, or a club, or a hatchet for cutting wood you could also use as a weapon. So carrying, a serf carrying a hatchet or a club is okay, right? But and they can't wear armor, but they can wear clothing, and leather is a material, right, made from animal products, so it is considered clothing. And so a serf can wear leather armor, right? A serf can carry a club or a sling because these are tools of hunting and so on. And so you could be a hunter as a serf, and so that's allowed, right? But they're not allowed to carry a shield. They can't wear ringmail armor, any kind of metal armor. They can't carry short swords or anything like that. Freedmen can carry those things. However, there are certain weapons and armor that are considered chivalric armor, only usable by nobles like knights. Long swords and broadswords and battle axes and tower shields and plate mail armor are all considered chivalric weapons, and freedmen are not allowed to use them. Only a nobleman is allowed to use them. And in fact, if you carry those weapons as a non-nobleman, you are basically considered de facto guilty of rising above your station and not obeying the social rules without even needing like a trial or anything, because you're carrying a weapon you're not allowed to carry. And the penalty for this can be from flogging all the way up to death, depending on what country you're in and how bad the infraction is. And so I was talking about this with this one friend of mine, and I said, it's really cool, and I love this idea, but we were saying, for a lot of players, they would hate it because they would say, you're not letting me use the weapon I want to use, and that's taking my agency away. They think that being allowed as a serf back with a serf background to say be a fighter and pick up a sword and a kite shield, which are chivalric weapons, and use them even though you're not a knight and it's illegal, right? If I say you're not allowed to do that, I'm taking away their agency, because their agency is any weapon I want is my agency, right? Because I'm getting to make the choice I want to make. But what Macris argues is that no, putting that rule out there is giving you agency, because I'm not saying that your fighter cannot actually buy and equip a sword. What I'm saying is that if you do, that choice is a meaningful one in that it has consequences. A nobleman who sees you with it might try to place you under arrest, right? Town guards might question who you are. You might be mistaken for a noble, and if you are, you can get into trouble for being mistaken for a noble, right? And so what Macris would argue is your agency is being given to you by the more restrictive case where you have to make a choice as to what weapon you're going to do that has consequences. Whereas in a normal game of D&D, most of the typical weapons that players carry do 1d8 damage. And the weapon is just a skin. They do bludgeoning and piercing and slashing damage. None of it matters. There are like 3 monsters in the entirety of all of the monster manuals and stuff that actually are resistant to just one of those and not the others. And 99% of the monsters either take damage or don't take damage from all of the bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing weapons. So it really doesn't matter. Ranged weapons, melee weapons, everything either does 1d6 or 1d8. Almost everything. There's a couple of weapons like dagger that don't, but 99% of the weapons do 1d6 or 1d8. The vast majority of weapons just do 1d8, and they're just a skin. And so the choice of whether you use a mace or a sword or a morning star and literally does not matter in D&D. But go into the world of Harn, where a mace is a chivalric weapon, a morning star is not, and a club is a tool, right? Those choices of which one to use can have social consequences and matter to the character. So the typical player in the vernacular would say that D&D gives them more agency because I can choose any weapon I want and there's no consequence. I can just do whatever I want. But what Macris would argue, and I agree with him, is that D&D gives you no agency because the weapons are all the same. There's no consequence to taking a weapon. Therefore, the choice doesn't matter. It literally does not matter if you're using a morning star, a mace, or a sword. Like one does piercing, one does bludgeoning, I think, and one does slashing. It literally doesn't matter. Against 99% of the monsters, you can pick up any one. Nobody's going to care. And therefore, that choice doesn't carry any agency with it because there are no consequences. It doesn't matter. Right? And so I think this is a really significant and important insight on the part of Alex Macris. And I completely agree with him that what matters are choices in terms of agency. And so if agency equals fun, and if to have fun you have to have agency, and to have agency you need to have meaningful choices, then what Macris concludes is you need a game with rules, and rather a lot of them, right? Role-play rules as well as mechanical rules. Now he does say you don't need so many rules that it bogs the game down, and what he argues is you need as few rules as you can get away with and still have the restrictions that lead to meaningful choices. Right? So a game like Champions or Dungeons and Dragons or Rolemaster, some of those are more complicated than others. But you have to have, Powered by the Apocalypse has fewer rules, but the rules need to give you consequences for your choices. Right? Your character must be able to suffer from making bad choices so that the choices have consequences and therefore have meaning. And I think a lot of players get this wrong because what they try to argue is you're taking my agency away because you're not letting me do whatever I want. But doing whatever you want is not meaningful. Okay, in this case, I think I'm going to take this guy out because I can one-shot him, and then I can fight the lieutenant alone. So that's cool. All right, that's a meaningful choice, right? I'm inside the mission of City of Heroes. At each spawn, you do have some agency. I decide how to approach the spawn, who to attack first, who do I attack second, when do I use inspirations. That's agency. And there are consequences to my action. This guy is more dangerous than the guy I one-shotted, right? So by making the decision I made, I took one guy out, which enabled me to go one-on-one with the lieutenant, which I judged to be reasonable. But it forced me to take this lieutenant all the way down his hit point bar with regular attacks. If I had used the assassin strike on this guy, I would have taken down half his hit point bar and it would have been quicker to take him out, but I would have faced two enemies at the same time. Okay? So that choice had a somewhat meaningful, wasn't a big deal, but a somewhat meaningful outcome. It was a choice that mattered, right? And this is what he's saying. Your choices have to matter in order for you to have agency. Okay? And so we can think back to some of the examples that I talked about. There's a boss. We can think back to some of the examples that I talked about in earlier episodes, like in Quintessence Lass's playthrough and Tiger Strike's playthrough and everything. And when we think about those, right, if you remember, there was a player who was claiming that his agency was taken away because his game master, okay, had determined that as a result of their actions, the player characters had upset their gods, and the clerics and the paladin weren't getting their spell slots back every day because their god was mad at them. Now, in the story, right, I disagreed with the reasoning of the GM that the god would have gotten mad. I didn't think the god would have, right, because this GM ruled that something like the party had been asked by a hag to sacrifice children and said if they do this, she would spare a town. And the players said, no, we're not going to sacrifice the children, so the town wasn't spared, and the GM judged that to be a quote-unquote evil decision. I don't agree with that. I wouldn't sacrifice children to spare a town either. I think that's a terrible decision to make. And I think that that's sort of a moral decision. It's hard to second guess the players in that case because you're giving them like a no-win scenario, right? It's a Kobayashi Maru. But whether or not I disagree with the GM about the interpretation of the specific event, the GM decided you have made a choice that gives you a consequence, right? You had the choice to help the hag or not. You chose not to help the hag. The town was basically wiped out or damaged, whatever, and your gods are mad at you now, and there's a negative consequence in that they won't answer your prayers. And this player was arguing that the gods refusing to answer his prayers and him not having the powers it says he has on his character sheet was taking away his agency. What he meant was, she's not letting me do whatever the heck I darn well please. And that agency is doing whatever the heck you darn well please. But what I'm arguing, in complete agreement with Alexander Macris, is no. Agency is about making choices that have consequences. You made a choice that mattered. That was the agency. And what you're supposed to be having fun doing in role-playing games is making choices that matter and then role-playing about the results of those choices. Right? It's not... Everybody's just so worried about whether like something negative happens to their character, and they think when something negative happens to their character, agency is being taken away. But as I said in, I think, the Mastermind playthrough, if you go back to Nightmare Lass, right? role playing about bad stuff happening to your character is some of the best role play you can get. Think about all of the role play possibilities, the actual social interaction possibilities that you can get being a serf who's walking around with a chivalric weapon that you took off of an enemy like Dark Knight or something, and you earned it, you looted it off a bad guy, but it's not legal for you to keep this weapon, and yet you feel entitled to it, right? You earned it, and it's a great weapon, and you want to use it in combat. Well, every time you walk into town, every time you approach a noble, you're going to be questioned. Hey, you aren't a knight. What are you doing with a knight's weapon? Did you steal this from a knight? Right? And that leads to role play. Oh, but it's hard for my character. It's creating problems for me. Well, that's role play, right? It's sort of like a dependent NPC in Champions. It's quote unquote a bad thing for your character. It's a negative, right? It's a disadvantage. But the DNPC provides all kinds of amazing and wonderful roleplay opportunities, and many players purposely pick a dependent NPC not just to get the disadvantage points, but because they know it'll be a great roleplay opportunity for their character. Right? The Superman player who picks Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen, go watch the Superman movie. Look at all the roleplay, quote unquote, opportunities Superman's player, Christopher Reeve, had by having the Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen dependent NPCs. Oh, I didn't get up there. That was tons of roleplay opportunity for Christopher Reeve, shall we say, quote unquote. Right? And so just having bad stuff happen to your character isn't not taking your agency away. It's giving you something to roleplay about. And if it's a result of one of the choices you made, that's the agency. So the next time you're in a role-playing game and you're complaining that the GM took your agency away because something happened that you didn't like, right? Just keep in mind that agency is about making choices that matter. And that when you make choices that matter, sometimes negative results occur. That's the part about it mattering, right? If negative results can't occur, the choices don't matter. Again, look at City of Heroes. Once you're on a story arc, a negative result literally cannot occur. It temporarily might, you quote unquote fail a mission, but as soon as you get out of the mission, the story arc continues or you redo the mission. And so the permanent negative result, long-term negative results cannot happen, and basically you cannot fail a story arc. And so, oh boy, we might die here. You cannot fail a story arc, and so you can't fail, right? Now this character is failed that fight, right? So that's a negative consequence of a choice. But in terms of the story arc, we can't fail the story arc. If I died here, I would just come back to the mission, right? And there's no way to fail the mission because you can just keep doing it until everybody inside is dead, right? Defeat all. All I got to do is defeat them all. There's no way to fail this mission. I mean, yeah, I could keep face planting and dying and going back to the hospital, but if I just stick with it enough, I can't fail this mission. So there's no meaningful choice in here, which means I have no agency inside this mission. I don't have any agency, right? I have agency of like which spawn to attack and stuff. Like it was stupid for me to attack all those guys without a heal, but I don't have any agency about what I do in the mission, right? I have to go through every hallway. I have to fight every troll in here, and I can't leave until I'm done. If I do leave before I'm done, right, and I log out or something, it'll just give me the mission back again, and it'll just keep doing that until I'm done, until I do what they decided I'm going to do, right? So there's no agency in here because there's no meaningful choice to make, right? There's agency about what I do with a spawn, but there's no agency about how I run the mission. I have to go through every room and defeat every guy. I can't defeat most of them and leave one. It says defeat all. I have to defeat all, right? And so don't underestimate the importance of consequences and meaningful choices. Those are the things that determine whether you are actually having agency or not. And what Alexander Macris argues is that to have fun at a role-playing game, you need to have agency. Thus, you need choices that matter, which means there must be a possibility of failure, a possibility of negative consequences, a possibility of stuff happening to your character that the character wouldn't want. But as a player, you should be okay with bad stuff happening to your character. Oh boy, this is going to be rough. I think I'm going to try to take the boss down first. As a player, you should be okay with bad stuff happening to your character because it's just something more to roleplay about, right? Now, in this game, no, right? If I faceplant, there's nothing to roleplay about because I'm here all by myself. So in that sense, you're like, oh, okay, well, all it is a time sink, and time sinks aren't fun, and so I don't really want to faceplant, and that's true. But in a tabletop game, where what you're doing is creating a story together, right? In the act of playing the game, you're creating a story together. You can have all kinds of fun with negative stuff happening in the story. Right? And I think I've mentioned this before. If you think about, any TV show, bad stuff happens to characters all the time. And it provides the actors and the characters with something to do. It's a story, right? So, we leveled up. So always remember, guys, that fun comes from agency in a role-playing game, and agency comes from having meaningful choices, not from just being able to do whatever you want, but being able to make choices that have a real impact on the world for good or for ill, right? You have two possible quests. One is to save the kidnapped victims from the goblins, and one is to save the princess from the dragon. And you decide to save the princess from the dragon, so the kidnapped victims all die, and the town from which they were kidnapped now hates your characters because of the choice you made. That is agency. Yes, some bad stuff happened to your characters. The town's mad at you now. But you still made the choice, and you have agency because you made that choice. And so you shouldn't get upset that something that your character wouldn't want happened to the character. Rather, enjoy it and roleplay about it. That's kind of what roleplay is all about, right? It's not, roleplay isn't just I act out everything good that happens to me and nothing bad ever happens. Roleplay is whatever happens, I think about how my character would react to it, and I roleplay about that. Now, I know there are some things we might not want to roleplay about. I wouldn't want to roleplay a rape scene, for instance. That's not the sort of consequence I'm talking about, right? But when your character has choices, and those choices matter, then that gives you something to roleplay about, and that should be fun. If it's not, then I question, why is one playing a role-playing game? And I think too often players think that the best way to have fun in a role-playing game is to run roughshod over the world and just do whatever I want. And whenever the GM says you can't do whatever you want, they're no fun, right? I've heard that. You're no fun. We're going to play with these very restrictive medieval times social rules where you can't use these certain weapons, and you're not allowed to go outside of your station, and if you break these laws you'll be executed, and the king can kind of do whatever he wants. We don't have like due process because you don't have juries of peers and stuff. You just get like the manor lord decides what goes on in his manor, right? And so it's a little unjust and unfair, and that's the way it was in medieval times, and we're going to role play that out. That's no fun because I want to be able to do whatever I want. But I think that the reason people think it's no fun, you say, well, don't people know what fun is? Maybe it's not fun for them. Well, did you ever try it? And that would be my question is, did you try it? Have you ever tried playing in a restrictive rule set where you actually followed the rules, where you didn't say we're going to hand wave away the rules because quote unquote it's not fun, and you actually role played about the consequences of meaningful choices? Try it a few times. You might find that it is actually more fun than being able to just hit the I win button every time you want. The more meaningful the choices, the more significant the victories, right? When there's a real possibility of defeat, when there's a real possibility of a bad choice happening, the good choices are all the much better, right? And so try it if you haven't. That is my recommendation. Try playing a game where there are rules, you have to follow them, you can't ignore them, and the choices you make are going to have consequences, both for good and for ill. And then just roleplay about it. And instead of being like, oh, but my character didn't succeed and now I have to roleplay failure, that stinks, get into the roleplaying of the failure, right? Think about how actors are on TV shows or in movies. Oftentimes, they love playing somebody who's suffering. The actor, I can't remember his name, who played the victim in the movie Misery. Didn't he? Wasn't he nominated for an Academy Award? Right? Often, the people who win Oscars, Best Actor and Best Actress, are playing in movies where they're a victim. They're dying of cancer or something like that. And you're like, oh, but the person is suffering. Yes, but there's a lot of great role play to be had in the negative consequence. I'm not saying it's fun to role play cancer. I wouldn't want to role play that. But there is a lot of great role play to be had in failing a mission and then dealing with the negative consequences of the mission. Right? Your character dies, and then everybody has to role play about the result of that death. And you make up a new character, and you have to role play that character's introduction to the party, and role play that social awkwardness that comes from not knowing the characters and stuff. Again, not every scene, not every type of consequence is necessarily going to be an enjoyable one for you to role play, and I understand that. You should discuss that with your GM. But if you want to really enjoy role-playing games as they were meant to be enjoyed, as they were designed to be enjoyed, and as they are best enjoyed, then I strongly recommend wanting to play games where you get agency in the sense of having the ability to make choices that matter, and then you role-play about the results of those choices. Try it and see what you think, and let me know in the comments whether you liked it. Until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been City of Heroes. Let's rant on the Rebirth server.